Something is burning right now that Washington doesn't want you to fully understand. And if you take 1 minute to sit with the raw facts of what is unfolding in the Middle East, not the spin, not the social media performance, not the carefully worded Pentagon press release, you will realize that what we are witnessing is not a controlled military operation going exactly as planned. What we are watching is the slow, painful exposure of an American strategic miscalculation of historic proportions. The Raad-500, that is Iran's Thunder 500, a solid-fueled short-range ballistic missile built from carbon fiber composites, designed specifically to split its warhead away from the booster in the early mid-course phase so that missile defense systems struggle to track it, struggle to intercept it, is not some theoretical weapon in a think tank paper. It is flying. It is hitting things. And the United States, for all its declared military supremacy, is burning through interceptors at a rate that should terrify every taxpayer in this country, every strategist at CENTCOM, and every congressman who voted to look the other way while stockpile warnings went unheeded for years. This is not a story about Iran winning. This is a story about what happens when hubris collides with reality, and reality does not flinch. Let's go back to the beginning, because context is everything in military analysis, and the American media has done a catastrophically poor job of providing it. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise attack against Iran they called Operation Roaring Lion, Operation Epic Fury, take your pick. They gave it multiple names, which itself tells you something about the confused political messaging surrounding this entire enterprise. The strikes hit nuclear sites, military installations, government buildings, the presidential palace district on Pasteur Street in Tehran, and they assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with dozens of senior Iranian military and political figures. This attack was launched, mind you, while negotiations over the Iranian nuclear program were still ongoing. Let that sink in for a moment. Diplomacy was happening, talks were on the table, and the decision was made to launch the largest combat sortie in Israeli Air Force history, combined with American Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from warships in the Mediterranean. They dropped over 200 bombs in the first 24 hours. They told the world this was about nuclear weapons, about regime change, about protecting American interests. But the math of what followed has told a very different story, because Iran did not collapse. Iran did not fold. Iran did not do what the architects of this operation apparently expected a severely degraded, sanctioned, isolated nation to do. Within hours of those initial strikes, Iran launched its retaliatory campaign it named Operation True Promise IV, and that campaign has now stretched across weeks and months, delivering ballistic missiles and kamikaze drones in wave after wave after wave, approximately 87 documented waves, targeting Israel, U.S. military bases in the Gulf, and energy infrastructure across 6 GCC nations simultaneously. For the first time in modern history, Iran struck all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council member states at once: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, all of them hit. Dubai International Airport disrupted. The Ruwais refinery in the UAE struck, forcing ADNOC to close production. Qatar's LNG infrastructure damaged to a degree that may take up to 5 years to fully repair. The Strait of Hormuz closed, disrupting approximately 20% of global oil supply. This is not the behavior of a nation that is losing. This is the behavior of a nation that prepared for this moment for years. Now let's talk about the Raad-500 specifically, because understanding this weapon is essential to understanding why American air defense has been under such extraordinary pressure. The Raad-500 was developed by Iran with a very specific design philosophy: make it lighter than its predecessor, the Fateh 110, by building it from carbon fiber composites instead of metal. Cut the weight in half. Use that savings to extend the range to 500 kilometers. Install a solid fuel motor called the Zohair that can withstand pressures up to 100 bar and temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Celsius. And then, this is the critical part, engineer the warhead to separate from the booster body during the early mid-course phase of flight, not the terminal phase. Not when it's already descending toward the target, much earlier. So by the time it reaches the engagement window of an interceptor like Patriot or THAAD, you are no longer tracking one large coherent object. You are trying to distinguish a smaller warhead from debris and decoys at altitude under time pressure with algorithms that were not designed to handle this level of sophistication from a nation that the American intelligence community repeatedly, embarrassingly underestimated. This missile was also the first Iranian weapon to implement thrust vector control, meaning it can shape its own trajectory as it moves moves through space. It is maneuverable, it is harder to predict, and Iran has been firing variants of this class of missile in documented precision strikes going all the way back to the Ain al-Assad airbase attack in 2020 and the Erbil strikes in 2022, demonstrating a consistently high hit rate against hardened targets even in the presence of Patriot air defense systems. This is not a new capability. America chose not to take it seriously enough, and the consequence of that choice is now playing out in the most brutal economic terms imaginable. A Center for Strategic and International Studies analysis has found that over the course of this conflict, the U.S. military expended at least 45% of its precision strike missiles, at least half of its THAAD interceptor inventory, and nearly half of its Patriot air defense interceptor missiles. Those numbers are not abstractions. THAAD interceptors cost approximately $15.5 million each. SM-3 interceptors run about $28.7 million per unit. Over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles have been fired, each priced at roughly $2.6 million. The total cost estimate for munitions expended is staggering, and the replacement timeline is even more sobering. New THAAD deliveries are not scheduled until April of 2027. The Pentagon's latest budget request asks for roughly $70 billion for munitions in fiscal year 2027, nearly 3 times the current level. Harvard's Professor Linda Bilmes put it in terms that cut through all the government language when she noted that the United States fired more Patriot missiles in the first 4 days of the Iran war than it had supplied to Ukraine over 4 years. Think about that. 4 days, 4 years. The asymmetry is staggering, and it reveals something profound about the nature of this conflict. What makes this strategically devastating is not just the cost. It is what the depletion means for everywhere else on the map. These interceptors are not a Middle Eastern-only resource. They are drawn from the same inventories that planners rely on for a potential conflict with China in the Western Pacific. They are the same systems that NATO's eastern flank depends on as Russia's war in Ukraine continues. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island stated plainly in congressional hearings that Trump's Iran operation has resulted in the transfer of a carrier strike group, an amphibious ready group, and various missile defense capabilities from the Indo-Pacific and Korea to Central Command. That is a real-time degradation of deterrence in the most strategically consequential theater of the 21st century. While American interceptors are being consumed shooting down Iranian Raad-500s and Khorramshahr 4s and Fatehs over the skies of Tel Aviv and the Gulf states, China is watching every number, every depletion rate, every replenishment schedule, and they are drawing their own conclusions about what a Western Pacific conflict might look like in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, here is where the honest military analyst has to confront something uncomfortable about the narrative being sold to the American public. The Trump administration launched this war with a list of stated objectives that have multiplied and shifted with each passing week. Destroy Iran's missile capabilities, destroy the factories that make them, annihilate the Iranian Navy, prevent a nuclear weapon, achieve regime change, sever support for proxies. These objectives, stated publicly by Trump, Rubio, Hegseth, Vance, and General Kane at various press conferences, represent an extraordinarily ambitious set of goals that require sustained, indefinite military pressure against a nation of 90 million people with one of the largest and most geographically dispersed military forces in the Middle East. And yet, after weeks of the largest American air campaign since the invasion of Iraq, the Defense Intelligence Agency's own director, Lieutenant General James Adams, told the House Armed Services Committee that despite significant degradation, Iran still retains thousands of missiles and one-way attack drones capable of threatening American and partner forces across the region, not hundreds, thousands. After all of this, after all those interceptors, after all those sortie runs, after all those Tomahawks, what does that tell you about the original intelligence assessment that shaped the decision to launch this operation? What does it tell you about the confidence with which this administration walked into this war? Because here is the strategic reality that the American public deserves to hear plainly and without euphemism. The United States has, in the course of fighting this conflict, cannibalized its own global deterrent posture. The administration's own national security strategy, released in November of 2025, explicitly identified the Western Hemisphere and the Indo-Pacific as priority theaters and called for the Middle East's importance to recede in American strategic planning. 2 months later, Washington poured its most advanced interceptors, its strategic bombers, its carrier assets, and its most expensive precision munitions into exactly the theater it had just declared secondary. If that contradiction does not disturb you, you are not paying attention. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran closed it on March 4th, 2026. That closure disrupted roughly 20% of global oil supplies. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has imposed what analysts are describing as a de facto toll regime, requiring vessels to submit documentation, obtain clearance codes, and accept escorted passage. Aaron David Miller of the Carnegie Endowment has described this as an unprecedented degree of Iranian control over the world's most critical maritime choke point, and this is the nation that Donald Trump declared would be finished, broken, unable to threaten anyone within the first days of Operation Epic Fury. The gap between the rhetoric and the reality is not a small one. It is a chasm. It is the kind of chasm that gets carved into history as a defining lesson about the limits of air power when applied against a deeply entrenched, ideologically committed, and militarily sophisticated adversary that has spent 4 decades preparing for exactly this confrontation. Russia, meanwhile, is not a passive observer. Reporting compiled across multiple outlets suggests that Moscow has been providing targeting information for Iranian missile strikes against Israel and Gulf states, while simultaneously benefiting from the elevated oil prices the war has generated, filling Russian export revenues even as Western attention and weapons shipments are diverted away from Ukraine. This is not coincidence. This is strategic opportunism of the highest order, and it points to the broader geopolitical picture that American television news has almost entirely failed to convey to the public. This conflict is not contained. It is not a surgical operation with clean edges and a defined end state. It is a regional war that has already touched Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Cyprus, Iraq, and has sent missiles toward Diego Garcia, the British-American base in the Indian Ocean, roughly 4,000 kilometers from Iran's borders. The world the United States wakes up to after this conflict is over is going to be fundamentally different from the world it thought it was managing when the first tomahawks were fired. The weight of what is unfolding here needs to be carried honestly. The American people were told this was about protecting them, about stopping a nuclear threat, about preventing catastrophe. Those are serious justifications that deserve serious scrutiny. And when you line up those justifications against the reality of depleted stockpiles that take years to rebuild, against a Strait of Hormuz under partial Iranian control, against an Indo-Pacific deterrence posture that has been measurably weakened, against a Gulf region where monarchy after monarchy just watched their own interceptor inventories drain toward zero, defending against Iranian missiles that kept coming anyway, the accounting doesn't balance. The thunder of 100 Raad-500s and the broader Iranian missile salvo isn't just the sound of a country fighting back. It is the sound of American strategic assumptions hitting the hard floor of reality.